that's Amira's bhajan. Payo ji maine Ram Ratan Dhan payo. So you have to have a heartbreak to fall in love.
Heartbreak or whatever break, something has to happen. Something has to happen.
Yeah. So you're the professor with the flute.
With the professor with the flute. Yeah, really.
Yeah.
Believe it or not, my interest in yoga happened when I went to the West. It so happened that I was driving home one day from work, and I saw this thing that said yoga studio. I have written this book from the point of view of a student, not as a master. So each of these 8 sections is written from that perspective of me exploring this thing. So I don't have a great revelation to say that I know all. I don't actually.
It was more targeted towards the youth?
It would help, certainly. It's at about 20 to 45 is what we hope the target would be.
Hmm.
Because we are losing touch with our roots, certainly.
How did you start with that first thing of controlling the mind or, stilling the mind, if you say?
Young people today have tremendous amount of mental issues, stress issues.
Correct, yeah.
So therefore, it's not that difficult to present a view of the mind to them which they like. So there's in fact an article which you may remember I wrote about a distortion in the breath is the first sign of a troubled mind.
Spend doing asanas in order to then move to the different parts or the different orders of the eight.
You can say whatever you want, but it's their time. When the time comes for them, they will do it in the way it should be done. So if it's a passing fad, as you mentioned, you come and say, do this for the next 1 month. I don't think people are going to do it unless there's a will to do so. I teach music, and those who learn free, a certain variety of people, they drop out. And because it was free, after 3 or 4 classes, they got busy doing other kind of stuff. They didn't appreciate it.
Tell us about that part of your life where you were well settled in US, earning for yourself, having this clean air, which you don't find in India, especially in the northern side.
The air of India is wonderful, as it is, it's wonderful. But anyway, continue.
I'm so glad to hear that. Uttishta Jagrata Prapya Varanna Bodha. Arise, awake, strive for knowledge. Namaskar. Welcome to the new episode of The Indic Pen. Today I have a very interesting guest with me who has simplified the foundation of yoga for us. Yoga that has become fashionable for all of us in the modern day world. Yoga that was repackaged by the West and sold to us has recently started to find a deep interest among us Bharatiyas again. Someone who laid the foundation eons ago was Patanjali. And we have today Vasudev Murthy, who has come out with this fabulous book called Yogasutra Simplified, which primarily present the 196 sutras of Patanjali to live a happy, healthy life in the simplest of ways. We also in this episode talk about music, about his passion for Indology. We talk about the practice of breathing and meditation and a lot of other interesting things that might just bring about that required change in your life that you're striving for. Let's dive right into this conversation. Since you've targeted this towards, you want young readers to read it. And especially readers who are already distracted with a lot happening around them. Yeah. I think Patanjali would be the last of their priorities, if at all, to learn yoga from, especially when they have yoga gurus today, modern yoga gurus, teaching them quick tips to, maybe get that perfect belly and perfect shape and things like that. Patanjali starts talking about the mind.
Right.
How do you get somebody who's learning this for the first time, a young brain, to start with that first aspect?
If the objective is that I want to teach people yoga, then that is definitely going to be a deterrent. Now, let me counter your point by saying...
No, but this is not just about you teaching yoga. It is also about what Patanjali wanted. This is a way of life that he's actually given through the 4 pathas. Yeah. If he talks about the mind in the first path, how do you suggest, and I'm sure you have tried to follow a practice.
Of course, yes,
you practice it unless you've practiced it, you wouldn't
clearly
be able to bring out the way you have got this out. So, probably let me put this question the other way around. When you started, and especially when you've had an experience of yoga from 1987 onwards, how was starting to practice, going back to the roots, starting from the from Patanjali's yoga, how did you start with that first thing of controlling the mind or, stilling the mind,
No,
if you say.
so before I answer that, I want to point out that contrary to your perception, in fact, young people today have tremendous amount of mental issues, stress issues.
Correct, yeah.
So therefore, it's not that difficult to present a view of the mind to them which they like, right? Which is the first line. So if I present this as an ancient script and they have to learn about it, they get intimidated by those kinds of things. So the mental issues part, which is exactly what this is a psychologist talking actually about the mind, is actually quite easy to express. This is an objective, this is the end goal. That actually works. But going back to the thing of how we get to yoga itself, 99% of the time, yes, maybe a bit of fitness, but most of the time it's about the mind. People are upset about things, they get cranky fast, they have anger issues, and they all know, and we're being fed such a diet of, things we should do, shouldn't do, and all these kinds of things. So our mind is constantly in a whirl. You see, and then people like to say, I'm an overthinker, as though it's a great thing to talk about. So I do think that the path to yoga, even to asanas, is actually, through the mind, in the sense we are addressing the mind finally. Because now, for example, if you look at yama and niyama, which is the external behavior, internal behavior, and I said I'm going to open up a yoga studio where I'll teach you yama and niyama first, no one's going to come. They don't want to be lectured to and say behave properly and all this, because those are the first two steps. So the asanas are the most visible and it looks good. So whichever way it works, whichever way in which you enter the eight,
So what you mean to say is it is not a set, there is no chronology to it that you have to do this first and then this and then this. You can.
In the ideal case, if you did that, it helps. But it all depends on where you're coming from. So that's why I'm saying if the asana happens, then actually you start rethinking
So when
about your
does
life.
the asana, the physical asana, what order does it
It should
come
be
into?
number 3.
Okay.
Ideally, but I don't think that's the way it's going to work. That's why
And
I
what
said.
comes before that?
First is yama, which is your behavior towards
Conscious,
the outside world, how you behave, ahimsa, all those kinds of things. Ahimsa, Patanjali spoke about it, not Mahatma Gandhi, by the way, just to clarify, right? He speaks about it as the very first principle of external behavior.
Practicing ahimsa.
Ahimsa, very first word in yama. And niyama is your internal, your way you conduct yourself, rules you live by, etc., etc. And then comes the asana, which is the keeping the body fit. There's a sequence here which is very beautiful. I want to point this out. So third is the asana, which is how to be fit. Fourth is the regulation of breath, which is more subtle now.
Which is more
So from outside, you're working with the outside world. Then you're dealing with your mind in the sense of your personal rules, etc. Then keeping your body fit. Then managing your breath, which is a very big,
And which was the biggest requirement during the pandemic to learn how to breathe right in order for you to at least
to deal with things.
Yeah. So
there's in fact an article which you may remember I wrote about control. The breath is the first, a distortion in the breath is the first sign of a troubled mind. So the fourth. The fifth is what you call pratyahara, which is saying that, you need to control senses. So people say, I'm a foodie, I like this, I like that. But actually, that's not a compliment to themselves. It means that something else is controlling them, right? So it's from a more, shall we say, tangible, which is the outside world, to the most subtle, which is the senses. That's the first. It's called Bahiranga, the first plan. So there's a sequence here. The fifth, of course, is dharana, sixth is dharana, dhyana, and samadhi. Now, the point is, why are we doing all this? In my interpretation, the idea is to mellow your mind little by little, so that you can actually do dhyana and dharana. For example, if you do meditation, if you want to do meditation for a long time, you have to have a fit body.
correct.
Your fit body means you have to have the focus to sit, to do stuff for 1.5 hours and so on, which means mental toughness as well, which means certain rules, discipline, and so on and so forth. Waking up early in the morning, doing certain things a certain way.
We have Robin Sharma selling the 5 a.m. club these days.
Yes,
you know
we
about
do.
that?
I know. I'm
And
aware
it
of
is
that.
nothing but waking up at 5 in the morning, which was something which I think we...
But we are doing, by the way, at the place where I am right now, we have a little informal club where we started getting up at 3:30.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So we tried that for about 3 weeks. Then we realized that 3:30 was...
3:30 is too
We
late.
made 4:30, but 4:30 we've stuck to now for the past 2 months. Quite a number of us.
lovely.
Yeah, and it has made a huge difference to the way.
Okay.
Bottom line is the asana is only the visible part. But if that's the way in which you enter the sequence, that's fine. Because even if you start asana, sooner or later you realize that perhaps I should be looking at yama and niyama as well, without it being explicitly mentioned.
But tell me something, who picks it up for fad? Even the asanas, there are people who pick it up for, say, a couple of weeks or a few months, and then, they themselves are not they don't stick to things and they keep moving on, and most of the people do that.
I do that. No.
How do you how does one ensure that at least this is the certain time period that one needs to spend doing asanas in order to then move to the different parts or the different orders of the age?
You can say whatever you want, but it's their time. When the time comes for them, they will do it in the way it should be done. So if it's a passing fad, as you mentioned, you come and say, do this for the next 1 month. I don't think people are going to do it unless there's a will to do so. They will try it. I've had many cases where they start for 1 or 2 days and then they said, not for me.
Tell me something. You are building communities.
Yeah.
You've been building communities, as you just mentioned about this 4:30. A group of you wake up. Does having such groups
Help whom?
help in disciplining or bringing in that and maintaining continuity in what you're doing?
I think so.
Whatever you're
Certainly. I
picking?
mean, for the people who stick on with it, I think there's certainly I would say only 10% of people who start actually
and then drop out.
So 90% of them drop out.
90%.
That's what I'm saying, because the whole thing of it's too early for me, I need to sleep more, and the whole thing. So
I'm not getting enough sleep, which is the common complaint.
Yeah, that's right. But once you do it, I think there's a transformation in people. They like the discipline that they have imposed on themselves. So who controls them? Does sleep control you? Does hunger control you? And now you have had some sense that I can control all these other things, including hunger, including all these things. It's tough. It's very tough. But people, if you do it and it comes at the right time, for some it comes at the very early, young age. We have a couple of very young students who are frankly gifted, and they can do it at a very young age. But most of us tend to do it 30s, 40s, 50s, and everything else becomes, doesn't have the same glamour anymore. That's when you're prepared to look inward and all those kinds of things. So it's a matter of timing. If just because, you tell them you should do it for a month, I don't think anyone's going to do it unless they really want to. And when will that won't happen? That's because you have to have some suffering in your life. I recommend suffering, because until you suffer, you are not going to enjoy many things like this. This stuff does not make any sense. It's just a fad. And you might as well go to the gym and you're doing asanas. But until your mind has been terribly disturbed because of life experiences, I think yoga is not going to have its the pungent impact of yoga won't.
So you have to have a heartbreak to fall in love.
Heartbreak or whatever break, something has to happen. Something has to happen.
Yeah.
It has to happen.
We did talk about the youth or the young people picking it up and how difficult or easy it is for them. But you also train, corporate leaders.
Yeah,
and,
I do.
And I think a lot of it also involves your knowledge of yoga that you bring into the sessions that you do with them.
It does.
Now, there is a new school or college going kid, and now here are people who've achieved quite a bit in their lives. That's why they're heading organizations and, leading big teams, and they have their own challenges in life. They have their own stress in life, which I think they want to explore such, activities, if we put it, that allow them to probably look inward and lead a better life, become a better leader. What is it that in your training you have assimilated or gathered about business leaders that actually make them who they are? And then why do they still strive for more through alternate views or looking at alternate views?
Well, to explain that, I'd like to give an example of a workshop I conducted, a leadership workshop in Singapore several years ago. And so you have these high flyers coming in, or they're supposed to be what they call high potentials. Right? And they're all brilliant. They've achieved a lot of stuff. But you say, tomorrow morning I'm going to have a yoga session at 5:30, for example. The minute that happens, there's a whole thing of, oh my God, okay? Except a small bunch of guys, 3 or 4 of them. And then I'll say it's voluntary. I said it's voluntary. You want to come, you come. So that's what I did. I was there at 5 o'clock, and then these 3 guys came out of about 30. And then it was really great. It was good fun. And they went back. And I mentioned this to the HR sponsor of that company that I had gone with. And she said, those are actually, we already know that they are the best of the best. And it's not a surprise that they have gone there. So what I'm trying to say is people who have the discipline to do these kinds of things, they are aware of how to manage their mind, manage the time, etc., seem to get yoga automatically. That this makes sense to them, right? And yes,
There are still some leaders who actually do not consider it as part of the.
that's fine. They will have a difficult life. Let's put it that way.
And
They
they
will go
make
through.
everybody else's life difficult.
They have high stress, and
So do you think that is one difference between a good leader and a bad leader?
is what.
The aspect that a good leader is always able to imbibe or accept a change more.
Yeah, I think so, and it shows in many different ways. And there are many examples of people who are supposedly great leaders, but they have heart attacks early. You've seen all these kinds of things, right? So somehow they know it, but still they want to believe they're invincible. But as you probably become more accepting of other people's, so-called flaws and those kinds of things. So I think yes, a person who tends to be a little more at a certain time. I think at an early age, a little bit of ambition and energy is necessary. I don't think we can start meditating too early, and there won't be a sense of purpose for the organization if all the engines just shut down, not shut down or slow down. But leaders, who are a little too hyper and are pushing people, they raise their voices, and you said, what we call toxics. There's a price that they're going to be paying at some point, if not now, in 10 years' time. By the time they're 50s, 60s, 70s, they'll be in bad shape in multiple ways. But those who realize early on that they have to manage their breath, which is what the pranayama part is, I think will actually go far. And this particular thing is not my wisdom. Actually, it's quite known now. A lot of companies do indeed try to conduct these yoga classes, but I've also seen all these yoga classes are recommended for middle and junior level employees. The senior guys don't seem to care that much, at least in my empirical, thing. But it must happen at an early age. I think when you are in your early part of a career, or at least mid part of a career, exposure to these things will make sense, which will pay off as you become senior.
Okay.
People are attracted to those who have peace on their face. If you're always in a hyper and there's a sense of tension, I don't think those are pleasant people to hang around with.
Right.
Things like meditation, yoga does actually make you a better person to interact with.
I would like to ask you a little bit more on meditation, but before that, let me just ask you about the commercialization of yoga.
Yeah.
Of course, Baba Ramdev is in a big mess right now, but and I have my own views about what's happening with him right now and why is it happening. But and also I think we should give him his due in terms of popularizing yoga again in India.
Sure.
Because I think we were exporting yoga for the longest time, but actually we were forgetting our own culture, how integral a part of our culture was it. So reawakening Indians to the idea of yoga is something that he can be credited to.
Sure.
But how do you view this entire commercialization of yoga, especially as a sadhak and as someone who also works with corporates, who has, whose main job is to consult with all these big organizations who make money, who have to make profit. Do you think making profit out of our ancient sciences is something that should be acceptable to people? Or
No, I don't think we should be very defensive about it. As long, the idea that these wonderful bodies of knowledge should be just handed over free, or it should be just handed, is very idealistic, if you ask me. Now, you also mentioned earlier about Western repackaging and so on. It might be true, but the fact of the matter is that there are many great practitioners of yoga even there. So commercialization, in the sense that you're talking about, if it's an initial draw, people don't appreciate anything that's free. You know that. If I teach music, and those who learn free, a certain variety of people, they drop out. During the time of the COVID, if you remember, I should teach many people online. And because it was free, after 3 or 4 classes, they got busy doing other kind of stuff. They didn't appreciate it.
So what you're saying is that if it doesn't have a monetary value to it.
For the vast majority of people.
Yeah,
it doesn't. It just doesn't. And so it seems like some esoteric philosophy, you can read about it. It doesn't have. But unfortunately, today we have to. So I don't feel.
Until the time you don't pay money, discipline doesn't come in as money.
Unfortunately, I don't think so. If it's free, it sounds cool, but it doesn't work. I wouldn't charge. That's a different matter. But I don't blame people for this. And ultimately, it's a good purpose. You can criticize it. Even the West, the studios are there, as you said, hot yoga, this yoga. Doesn't matter. As the funnel becomes narrow and not narrow, the practitioner emerges. If you really like it, soon it'll make sense. It's okay. I mean, I also paid for my yoga classes in Bangalore. I definitely think it was worth it. I definitely think it was worth it. I think if it was free, I might not have actually gone for class. So let's not call it commercialization. I think it is a certain value, and there are many ways to look at it. I give you something, you give me something in return. Now it happens to be money, fine. But to call it commercialization, it makes it seem as though only the West has the right to commercialize, and we shouldn't even be thinking of. In fact, even the Yoga Sutra, they talk about money and dhan towards the very end, last one of the sutras. So this is also talked about. Even the Bhagavad Gita, other places, the issue of value in terms of money has not been looked down upon. Now, whether it's excessive, whether people are charging too much for the same thing, I don't know. That's a matter of opinion.
So what does the Yoga Sutra say about this?
He talks about it at the very end. He talks about that in your life, a man's purpose has 3 or 4 things, which includes earning. Yeah. So it's not that it's a dirty word. You should, depending on who can afford it. If you can afford it, you should pay, right? Now, I'll give you a very nice example of this, okay? My Veena teacher, she's a great lady, very, very, very sweet elderly lady. And the knowledge that she gives me is a form of yoga. I mean, not traditionally, but very deep and beautiful knowledge of music. She charges almost nothing. Nothing. In this day and age. And when I try to pay her more, she gets very upset. She says it's a sin for me to take more than this. And I cannot tell you, if I would explain, how much she gives me. So that's the other end maybe. But still, I like to pay her for whatever. I feel I can't pay her enough for her wisdom. Same in yoga. I think if someone is willing to pay that much, perhaps only for asanas right now, but that's fine. That's the first step in the journey. That's okay.
And the Ayurveda that is getting packaged and sold and being advertised, which is the primary concern for the Supreme Court today?
Well,
because there is an entire science of Ayurveda which is actually bringing in benefit to people who are, who've gone that way.
Yeah.
The government has set up its own entire institution to promote Ayurveda. But there are organizations who are packaging it and selling it inside India, outside India.
I think this is just the nature of how things are for any field of knowledge. Someone's going to come there and take advantage.
And become a profiteer.
That's okay. Yeah, fine. But for every 10 cases, if 3 or 4 people are doing this kind of stuff, it doesn't negate or invalidate what the others are doing. Talking of Ayurveda, yes. If I hadn't been going for Ayurveda treatment, I would have probably lost my right leg. So I have great respect for it. And our Indic knowledge is very deep in so many respects. And unfortunately, people like me who are urban get to know this only after leave India. So I will say that even though I'm rooted in India to some extent, that experience had to happen for me, that I had to live outside India to respect it more. It's just the way things are.
Let me talk about meditation now again. It is very easy that, one day when you walk out and you are stressed, I mean, you look tired and stressed, and so while people, the easiest and the quickest advice is meditate kiya karo. But when you actually go and sit down and think of meditating and sit down and tell yourself, acha, let me try meditating. It just doesn't happen.
No.
The moment I close my eyes, it's my personal experience that I'm sharing, that I've tried it several times. And every time I close my eyes, for the first few seconds, my mind will be, for the first few minutes rather, my mind will be everywhere. Ye kaam nahi hua, ye pending hai, I had to call that person, I had to follow up for this. There were tens and thousands of things that go in your mind. The first few minutes go there. So somebody told me that after you've passed those first few minutes of, wandering, that is when, if you can sit through that is when you actually start focusing inside. So I tried that as well, so first few minutes you start focusing. And the next few minutes, as soon as you start centering your energies and, maybe focusing, I try to focus on my forehead, and automatically your eyes, I start crying, my eyes well up and I start crying, and that's when I break. I completely break off from the, then I can't sit for any longer. So, is it a natural process when people tell you that, go and meditate, and when you actually try doing it, is it a natural process to first wander? Then when you're centering your energies to feel expressions that are, pent up inside, and then what is the point where you actually start, feeling calmer, and you start actually taking that journey within? Can you just explain that?
I can, but
Yeah.
let me start by saying that to assume that I'm extremely knowledgeable on meditation is not true, in the sense that it's not that I can give you fantastic tips, but I can tell you references to this, how this works. I think you can't just sit down and start meditating. It's pretty nice, but it doesn't work like that. So from 2 points, so 2 sources, I want to just tell you. In the Bhagavad Gita, in a number of chapters, Krishna actually explains to you how you should be sitting.
Correct.
There's a place you sit at a particular height, your spine should be straight. Also, there that you must know that's the suggestion
Right.
of how to start. But again, if you're already agitated for whatever reason, and just sit down, let me just do a fast track meditation. It doesn't work like that.
Correct.
Which is why I mentioned to you that this whole business of yama, niyama, asana, etc. is all a prelude, preparatory to actually getting into a meditative stage. So because again, if you have this thing of yama, the discipline towards let's say ahimsa, or not coveting anything, things like that. If you already trained your mind to be mellow and soft like that in a number of ways, and in asanas as well. In the Yoga Sutra, there are only 2 lines which talk specifically about asanas, surprisingly. And one is about Sthira Sukhasana. I think it's mentioned somewhere. There's one line. That's what he says. So, if you're in the asana practice, if you're able to maintain a particular asana for an extended period of time, all these things are preludes to the meditative process. So you can't just sit down and say, let me start meditating, because the rest of your mind has not been sufficiently managed. You haven't enjoyed silence, you haven't enjoyed stillness, you haven't enjoyed a personal discipline about behavior and all those kinds of things. In that case, to start meditating and then getting frustrated, it's understandable. You will be frustrated. But he does, again, going back to Bhagavad Gita, he
So
does.
what you're saying is there are certain preparations you
Yes,
have to
that is my experience. That is my experience. There may be others who can say things better, but it is necessary to do all these things first. You can't just start meditating. It is like
But let me also share one more
Sure.
aspect there. I'm a trained Bharatanatyam dancer.
Okay.
And I think for me, the most meditative is when I'm dancing, which I can't now. But I've for some strange reason I've not been able to practice and get back to my dancing again. But every time I dance, I find it deeply relaxing, relieving. There is some adrenaline rush that actually allows me to be happy. Right after I've had maybe a very rigorous dance number, or danced on a number which is, I think that does music that do that for you?
Yes, it does. It does.
So music is meditative. I
It's
feel
meditative.
it's meditative.
Yeah. That's why the Drupad form, if you and I know about Drupad,
Yeah.
how can you say that Drupad is non-meditative? It is. You just linger on a single note. In fact,
Single
your
note,
mind is actually exactly on the note.
That was exactly what I was telling you about my mother.
Yeah, yeah.
That, there were the na, ra, ya, da. These were the 4 letters. And on that, her Drupad practice used to commence.
So-
and for hours.
For hours.
Yeah.
For hours. So that's meditation. So who said that just because you sit in one place, that's good. That's a possibility. But if there are other ways to do this, why not? I mean, people go crazy about paintings. And about classical music, many people have taken certain rags and they actually go into some kind of ecstasy, or not ecstasy, but they are in a different zone which we cannot understand. There was one particular Pandit, I can't remember his name now, but he went crazy about Todi. He would think Rag Todi was his thing. All day and night, that's what he would do. Was he not meditating? Of course he was. That's what it is. So I think it depends on what you can do. Now someone might...
Like for me, it's dance. For you, it's music.
Yeah.
What if I ask you to define what meditation is, then how will you define it?
Well,
If we say it is not just about sitting in a posture, in a lotus position and, closing your eyes, as we just talked that, it could be meditative. There could be different ways to meditate.
so this business of dharana and dhyana, which
Okay.
is the sixth and seventh limb of the thing, is what we do in music and dance. If you think about it, because we are, for example, I have this violin here, right? So you concentrate on the instrument, on the music, and that's called dharana. Finally, we are lost. In dharana, I'm currently aware of all of you around me, but when you're really deep into a particular rag or even a single note, none of you exist. Isn't that what it is?
Right.
So that is what meditation also is somehow you block out everything else and get lost in a certain bliss which is very personal to you. Then you try to articulate it. Perhaps it works to some extent.
Which got you interested in this subject? What was your interest in? What was it that brought you into practicing yoga?
Believe it or not, my interest in yoga happened when I went to the West.
Oh,
Yeah.
so,
So this is ironical.
Ah.
But yes, I was a typical IT guy, and so it so happened that I was driving home one day from work,
yeah.
and I saw this thing that said yoga studio, and I felt compelled to go and check out what was going on, and it was your asana studio. It was by an Indian immigrant elderly lady, and she was doing a fine job. But being a restless person, the kinds of things she was talking about, was not resonating with me. But nevertheless, that was the verbal part, the stuff that she was talking about. That I was not ready for all that yet, but I was doing asanas. That's just which is, of course, if you know yoga, it's just 1/8 technically of the whole show. So then I did go to a yoga studio, where the philosophy, or rather the type of instruction, was minus all the soft and stuff about connecting with yourself and all those things. It was a very rigorous asana practice. That's what it was. They weren't trying to repackage it in a very beautiful way with birds singing and all the energy from this. They weren't like that at all. It was very, very cut and dried. But that's what I needed at that time, to be
So
perfect.
something like what they call the hot yoga.
Maybe not. It wasn't exactly that. It was
Yeah.
it was the yoga. I mean,
Yeah.
and the instructor was clearly very knowledgeable, and I was very impressed. And I needed it at that time. As
And it
turned
was
out.
an Indian instructor.
Yeah, very much. It was. So it was minus all the bells and whistles. It was very, very good, and it literally, they disassembled me, assembled me back again, and I needed that at that time. Now that's the typical, way in which most people understand yoga. So I think that was an important thing that happened. And subsequently, of course, they introduced me to meditation and all that stuff, which I would still not say I'm particularly good at.
And this was how long back?
We're talking about decades ago. Let's not go into that. We're talking many years ago.
No, because I want to understand how long have you been practicing yoga?
Oh,
now?
well, in the sense of when my introduction happened, so that would have been in 1987 in the US,
Wow.
86.
Okay.
Yeah. But then when I came back to India, that was in 1995. So then I started, my dad sent me to these places about 98, 99.
And that was mid-20s, mid-30s? What was
Mid-30s.
Mid-30s.
Yeah.
And that is usually the time when most of us
Yeah.
start.
We have some crisis of some kind.
Yeah. That we have to address, and we suddenly see those bellies and those
That's right.
extra kilos.
But it wasn't
and-
that, of course.
Yeah.
Actually, it turned out to be the opposite. It wasn't about that. I was not unfit necessarily, but I did need that kind of discipline. Let's put it that way.
Okay.
I did need some kind of a structure of getting up really early in the morning and doing things, and no soft and dreamy stuff. It was just to the point. Now, to your point, so then I continued, and if you ask me about the origin of this book, obviously in many literary festivals, I met people like you and various publishers, and I ran into Akasha of Jeko,
Jericho.
and we hit it off very well. And you may remember, were you there at the Pune Literary Festival? You probably were in some edition.
Yeah, some edition.
So he was there, and then he reached out to me in, I think, about 2021, saying that there was a dire need for someone to rewrite this book. I mean, rather express this book in a simpler way. I wasn't very sure that I fully understood the philosophy of yoga, to be perfectly honest. I did have, bits and pieces. So I still can't claim I really understand this very well. You started by saying I've really, gone deep into Sanskrit. Perhaps I have, but to say that I'm a yoga guru would be false. That's not true at all. Because I have written this book from the point of view of a student, not as a master. So each of these 8 sections is written from that perspective of me exploring this thing. So I don't have a great revelation to say that I know all. I don't actually. But then I have obviously this interest in yoga going back a little bit from the early 2000s to all these years. It became a passion and interest and so on and so forth. And I even taught a few people, though I'm not certified. I'm an illegal, unauthorized yoga teacher, but I've been doing that. I enjoy it actually. And then of course combined with writing. So they because I had a I'd written other books as you know, and they felt that I could do it. Now that brings me to the point that, or maybe you're going to ask me about this later, but the whole issue of repackaging these very old classical texts in a more palatable form is, I
It's
think,
more understandable. I think it was more targeted towards the youth.
the book.
Yeah.
Well, not necessarily. It was target. Well, it would help certainly. It's at about 20 to 45 is what we hope the target
Yeah.
would be, because we are losing touch with our roots. Certainly, I would certainly say that for myself. To a minor exception, that music has been my thing. But apart from that, other things, no. What does a typical middle class family do, which is urban perhaps? They'll bring a whole lot of Bhagavad Gita, will be here, Ramayana will be here, all these things, and they'll be in the shelf, never to be read again, because we don't understand what's going on over there, and we feel a bit inferior that we don't get it. So that was the challenge. How do you present something as esoteric as Yoga Sutras in a simplified form? And that was a very interesting challenge, according to me. So I did try, and the first 2 attempts failed.
Okay. And how was that? I
I'll
mean, was
explain.
it okay?
I'll tell you why. Because I made the same mistake. Now, how are our old classical texts presented to us? It's like shloka by shloka.
And then you give the
Yeah,
translations.
you do that. And even in those translations, even in the explanations, what you have are tangential references to other texts, and
Which again is alien to people.
it's alien to people. And plus they'll throw in some words, some random shloka will appear here.
Right,
They'll
right.
suddenly talk about karma, they'll suddenly talk about this Veda, and the reader doesn't know. So the time when you wrote a book because you were this intellectual and wanted to express your intellectual ideas, that time has gone. It is now the time for the writer to think about how the reader assimilates information. So I'm going to talk about a little later today about the other projects I'm working on. But that was the idea here. And if you notice, the thing that I've done over here is use diagrams, pictures,
Yes.
graphics.
Yeah.
In short, it was a long journey, but I think I went typically in the asana practice way, with some dips into other kinds of things. But then the book was written from the point of view of a student. Let me not pretend as though I have this deep knowledge of reading about
Of course, yeah. And I think that is the best way to bring out how a student would
Sure.
understand a
Yeah, I think so.
concept or a
Yeah.
philosophy.
Yeah.
Especially a philosophy which is, as you already mentioned, that asanas form just the 1/8
Yeah.
of yoga. So this is the perfect moment for me to ask you about music.
Yes, ma'am.
More about music.
Please.
And before we go on to that, would you like to play some notes for us?
Sure, I can do that. This is my violin, but I don't want to play as in the traditional violin. I just
Okay.
strum. I like to keep strumming. Let's see if you recognize this old song.
Okay. वन रिकॉग्नाइज हो रही है अभी वर्ड्स नहीं आ रहा You're making it tougher with every note you play.
Yes, yes. But I'll
The
leave it with
last two ones were easier. But no, I recognize the dhun. But
Or which is the other one I was thinking of this morning, was a nice.
that's a Mira's bhajan. Payo ji maine Ram Ratan Dhan payo. I think this was one of the most important, if not the most important, but one of the important things that brought you back from the US.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Tell us about that part of your life where you were well settled in US, earning for yourself, having this clean air, which you don't find in India,
That's not
especially
true.
in the northern side
The
of.
air of India is wonderful. As it is, it's wonderful. But anyway, continue.
I'm so glad to hear that. Sitting right in Delhi,
That's fine.
where the AQI
I would
levels
rather
are
have
always
any
high.
high IQI in India than any clean air anywhere else. This is my country, and I.
How beautiful. How beautiful. But yes, I think this was one of the main reasons for you to get back to India.
And importantly, very importantly, that's correct. Yeah, yeah.
Tell us about that.
Sure. So obviously, I was, music has and was the most important thing for me. The rest
Who
was
introduced you to music?
my mother. My mother.
Okay.
In the sense, like, that was at most. She used to play the veena and she used to sing. So
wow, okay.
my memory is only about music. So it was not a problem. Nobody forced me to do anything. So it was automatic. So and I followed it up in college and all that stuff. Everything else was frankly a distraction. Music was my main thing. But then when I went to the US, obviously I took my violin with me, and then I used to. My guru was this. I can explain how he became my guru. But there I used to listen to the work of Pandit Vijay Jog.
Okay.
He was, of course, he's passed away. So there are many duets of him with Bismillah Khan, if you know. And so my job was to sit in front of the tape recorder and just keep on listening and playing. Basically, I'm just copying,
Okay.
right? That was my thing. And this went on for a few years. And then suddenly I woke up and said, what am I doing here? Why am I here?
Started with the violin or the veena?
No, violin.
Okay.
It's always been the violin. And then it happened that because of a number of reasons, Pandit Joe came to the US and I hosted him and I played with him there.
Wow,
I played with
okay.
him. And that's when I realized that, what am I doing here? And I said, if it is so important to me, then why am I being distracted by everything else? So that was a important reason. I wanted to get back and learn from him. Surprisingly enough, a number of friends did not support it. Because they felt it was, I'm my career, I'm doing this and whatever. But to me, it was totally irrelevant. Music was the thing. So I went to Calcutta and then I went to learn from him. And it was a very, very great experience, which I cannot describe to you. But trust me, it was extraordinarily emotional. I mean, tears, weeping, all that was happening. Has to, because you're learning from such a great
Somehow
man.
I feel that tears part is an integral part of letting go and starting your meditative practice.
Yeah. So he taught me, and I know I'm very, very lucky to have learned from him. So, and I'm quite conscious the heritage that he has passed on to me, because he himself had great gurus going back to so many other people. So I learned from him, and then finally I decided that was while I was in the US. I came to Calcutta to learn, and then I said, okay, time to go back, and that's what I did. So I came back to the important part. Then I've continued my musical journeys. But later on, my teacher was very upset with me. So I went to him and, I played for him the last few days of his life, last maybe couple of weeks, and I played for him, So he was very happy with what I played. He said, you must be playing and giving concerts. So then I gave him a long speech about how, this fame is not important. I don't want to pay for this thing, and, I don't want money. And he said, you're an idiot. Okay. So why did I spend all my time teaching you when you don't want to play for others and make a name for yourself? In the sense, he meant it in a very loving way, of course. But I still believe it. I don't like to play in public. It's my own thing.
But you are training people.
That's okay. That's their journey. That's fine. Then hopefully they also will do well. But that's not my job. My job is not to train people for.
No, so what I meant was you have created a community of musicians,
Yes.
which I also am part of for some strange reason.
Yeah.
But not only that, I think in the current role that you have at Rishihood University, you're also training students.
For other things, but my formal role is something else.
Yes, but this becomes a part of the teaching exercise.
It is. Yeah.
Tell us something about that bit, because
Which bit?
I believe this was a conversation we were having outside of this podcast.
Yeah.
And it was that, there are students, these are young people who, for whom it was very uncool to really think of. I mean, many of them have for the first time been introduced to Shastriya Sangeet,
That's right.
the Indian classical music. So how did this bit happen? Why did you bring this into the entire scheme of things, which is more focused on entrepreneurship and studying on management and business? What made this part of the entire exercise?
I don't think I went specifically out searching for students and that's about it. But if you were to come to campus, I'd be generally roaming around with my flute or something like that.
Okay.
So people probably noticed.
So you're the professor with the flute.
We're the professor with the flute. Yeah, really.
Yeah.
And then one thing led to another. So somebody met me along the way and said, can you teach, etc. I said, yeah, sure, come. So word spread, word of mouth, so to say. So, and it's really informal in the sense I don't have a timetable. Whoever wants to come can learn and go away. So word spreads like that. Now, the thing is, as you said, it's not that they have no exposure to music. Yes, of course, it's true. But I would like to believe that, you encourage them when they make the very smallest of little bit of progress. They get one note right, or they get something right. So that's what if you encourage them, and they find their voice. I often talk about people finding their sa, as in sa.
True.
And they don't know what it is. They don't really know. They may, for example, be very gifted. They may have a divine voice, and they're not even aware of it because nobody told them that they had a great voice.
Correct.
Because probably they're surrounded by idiots. I don't know. But nobody told them they had a fantastic voice, or they had some kind of a gift for music. So all this stuff, tanpuras and this people, singing khayals and tumris, it's very intimidating, you see. So you're going to simplify it and make it available. So you teach them in your jeans and t-shirt. Things like that, that it's possible. You don't really have to have this wild look, of a guru with long hair, and I'm not like that, right? So it has to come from there. I think they have to be comfortable. They can relate to the teacher, and it should be small doses, and plenty of appreciation, because they're under tremendous pressure from 100 places. And I was the same, right? When I was in college, all we heard was how terrible you are. Nobody ever spoke about what might be good about you. The idea was to
No,
correct.
but let me also share with you this personal experience that I've of late been. In fact, it's an observation that I've made that of late I see a lot more young people not only taking up Indian classical music, but also the music from their own. Like we have suddenly we see these numerous bands from Uttarakhand
Yeah, I saw that. Yes.
who blend Shastriya
Yes, they do,
music
they do.
so well with
Yes.
the regional
Yeah,
notes, the Pahadi notes.
That's right.
And still, there are such brilliant young
There's no doubt about it.
singers who are now, they're doing so well online. I mean, they've become all these influencers online, and they have a huge following there. So it is a change over the last couple of years that
I think so
we've
too.
observed.
Yeah.
How much do you credit this to the current, government or the regime which is in place in the last 10 years? Because it's a very recent change that I'm
It is. There's no doubt. In my time, for example, we were all isolated cases, or outliers, literally outliers, who were crazy about music. People just tolerated us.
Quite like in my times, I recall, I was, I think, the only one who was learning an Indian classical dance form. Most of the others were learning hip hop or, the new forms that were cropping up from the West, which were. So I think, to me, it does feel that, it is important to have a premier,
Have what?
a prime minister,
Yeah.
who wears his identity,
Culture,
national
yeah.
identity,
I agree,
on
I
his
agree.
sleeve.
I agree.
And I think whether we like it or not, or whether many people would like to negate the fact, but he is the biggest
There's no doubt about
influencer of the young minds as well.
There's no doubt about it.
But for you, when you are in direct interaction with them every day, what is the transformation you see in those who have taken on this, and made music part of their lives during your teaching experience?
That's a very big question. So I can't speak for them, but I can observe. I'll tell you what I observe.
Exactly, yeah.
So certainly, like I said, once they find confidence. Okay, your question is first of all important. I think the issue of our cultural identity and pride in our cultural identity, our music, art, all these things which have been under the carpet since as long as I can remember, since the 10 years, this has changed. So I think, and in fact, if you notice, PM Modi also is a pretty good percussionist.
Oh, yes.
Have you noticed?
Yeah.
Yeah.
He has a
So-
great sense of
So
beats.
all that comes from pride. Our music is wonderful. It is a great thing. And when the young minds are able to produce a tune going back to the classical roots, they feel such joy. I can sense it, and they come back again and again. So we have certain students. So I'll be traveling, which I travel a fair bit. So when I land at the airport, land at whichever place, there'll be one WhatsApp saying, "Do you have time for 15-minute class?" So that means something has some. Yeah, it is good. And they pester me sometimes. They literally do. They all meet me and say, "When can we have a class?" So that's good, which means that they are sensing that that's also part of their identity. It's not about me. It's that something has something has resonated, which makes them feel that music is part of their personal identity and sense of roots. There is one young lady I do remember who said that this music, she was trying to best to articulate, and I can't articulate, but I understand. It makes her connect with her country. Even though we're just talking about Shastriya Sangeet, which incidentally is anyway based on our folk music in many different ways. That's a different matter. But she felt that music was giving her a sense of connection to the country. I think it's a very big statement. Just to say Sare Gama Padanisa and say it correctly is a source of great joy.
Finding yourself.
Finding yourself. That's what. This video should be called Finding Yourself.
Finding yourself.
Yeah.
No, actually, it's a good
Isn't it?
title for the year. Absolutely perfect. But in the process of finding yourself, I think what I have realized and why we started with this podcast is that, and since you brought this up about, cultural identity and being aware of it and taking pride in it, I think the one of the most important things and reasons for me to start with this podcast was that in order to build that national identity or take pride in that national identity, you have to go back to your roots. Because till the time you don't trace your way back to the nation from the place where your ancestors were, I think somewhere it is incomplete.
That's right.
It happened with me. It happened with a lot of people who I invite on the show. It has in some ways happened with you when you took that decision to come back from the US and settle
That's
back
right.
in India. And a very interesting aspect that you brought up just a while back outside again of this conversation was the X+1 factor. That there are a lot of people in the US, Indians in the US, who've saved up enough to finally come back to India before they passed away. Tell us a little bit more about this.
It was a phenomenon even in my times that everybody had this glorious vision that ek din aayega when
Jab
I
hum वापस भारत जाएंगे.
that was used to be called X+1 syndrome, that after 5 years, after 10 years, after I make so much money, and so on. But it's always a moving target. And when the time came, they had a kid, all these things were happening, and there was always a reason why they couldn't go right then and there.
So next 5 years and then you give 1 year more to yourself.
And then keep, but it never actually happens. Most times they get sucked into the quicksand of existence. It's very difficult to pull away. But I did. And then subsequently others have. It's not that only I have. Others have. But now what about those who cannot do it? The India calls them in hundreds of ways. They spend all their time listening to Indian music. Indian conversation, Indian food, Indian community. So what exactly is happening? They want to come back, they can't come back, and then, their children over a period of time talking about roots, next generation might, subsequently, is not going to happen.
It's happened even with us.
Yes, even with us.
We were all of us who were born and brought up in these big cities. Very few of them are aware of their identities, where their roots are, where do they come from, where do their ancestors come from. And it is so sad that especially for children, because I have relatives who've moved out and who have children now who are maybe US citizens because by way of birth. They would in the next decade or so be completely disconnected even with their Indian identity. A lot of them are, it is not new to be calling somebody ABCD, which was the term used for American born confused Desi, and I think that has continued for decades now. How do you see that reversal happening? With the current regime, I do know that there is a lot of interest of NRIs back in the
there's
country.
No doubt. It is true. I travel a fair bit and I absolutely feel that everyone's desperately wanting to come back and spend some amount of time. So they do want to come back. Earlier it was, I'll come back provided I get this salary and I'm this fantastic person, but now it's not the case. They do want to come back at any cost. So yes, I think it's changed. People overseas also want to learn. My own nephew, for example, in Chicago, who is totally Americanized. Still, he likes to learn from me when I teach him music. And he feels happiness. There's something there. There's something genetic somewhere. I can't explain. I don't know what it is. He likes Indian music and he wants to come back, but he's not able to. But I think overall, people are deaf. There's a sense of incredible pride about India and wanting to come back. And the culture is something everyone's feeling great about. So it's hardly surprising. You talked about Instagram, social media, people, doing music. Of course, and we're lucky that this has happened. in the sense we're living in a time of YouTube and all these things where culture now is flowing much more easily.
Correct.
Online classes and what have you. For example, I have this American friend of mine in Los Angeles. He learns Drupad online from somebody who's in Nagpur or something like that. So all these things are happening.
It's become easier also.
It's become easier.
The
So
access is easier.
access is easier. So maybe on the one hand, and earlier you remember, well, you may not, but you wrote an aerogram. This used to be called aerogram.
Yes, yeah.
It used
Those
to
long one
take
looks,
14 days to get from the US to, and so that was it. And when you made a phone call, you had to watch each minute was $1.20.
Correct.
So all that was happening. Those days are over. So now the distance isn't felt so much, perhaps. So that's probably giving me some hope that the bond is actually getting stronger.
Strong.
People can be anywhere, but rather than weakening, at least for 1 or 2 generations, it's pretty strong. Yeah.
And do you think that, Indian classical music, well, at least I think that Indian classical music, Indian classical dance forms or any art form that originates from India, apart from yoga, are things or ways in which you can actually strengthen that identity?
I think so. There's no doubt.
So training, that's what I do with my children. Training your children, at least in one of these, will always help them stay rooted.
Yeah, absolutely. Conscious.
Wherever they are.
Consciously. Also, I want to just make a comment on another part, our classical texts. Even those have become available now online in the sense of classes and whatnot. You may remember we had a conversation about an online Bhagavad Gita class.
True.
In those classes, you'll be surprised. Well, not surprised. You may not be surprised, but it's heartening that a large number of these people are young children.
Young children, true.
And they recite like this. It's just fantastic.
Fantastic.
Yeah. That is why, talking about my own journey as a writer now. So after the Yoga Sutra, suddenly this light bulb has gone off in my head that many of our classical texts will find acceptance if it is repackaged in a more palatable way. Right?
Absolutely.
So
I would like you to tell us
I'm going to tell you about
in
that. I'm going to tell you about
detail
that.
about the 64 colors.
Yes,
and the
yes, yes.
14.
But there's one more also, but I'll tell you.
Yeah.
So the 64 colors is Chauset Kala, as they call them, is this place in Rishi Sandipani ashram in Ujjain, where it is said that Krishna, Balrama and Sudama visited to learn how to live.
Okay.
There's 64 skills. So the list of skills that they were taught to have a fulfilling life is mentioned over there. So, whether it's disguising oneself, painting, music, art, a whole bunch of very, very interesting skills to have a fulfilling life. So I and a couple of friends are working on a project to repackage this and make these 64 colors available in this kind of easy to access form. Rather than simply giving a whole list here, otherwise, Kala 1, Kala 2, Kala 3.
And are you relating it to day-to-day management? Or?
Well, rather than management, I would say I'm making it as a semi-fictional account of young people finding their identity. And they're finding joy in certain kinds of arts and so on and so forth. So there are people there. Rather than simply a non-fiction
Something
thing.
that we were just about talking.
Yes.
Finding joy in the Indian art form.
Yes, so that's what we're going to do. So there's a story. And in that story, there are little tangents into the different colors to make it look like a complete. So that's one. The other one, which I am also doing, is actually on the Bhagavad Gita itself. So the proposal has gone in the sense of me rewriting in the same thing like Yoga Sutras, of trying to make again the Bhagavad Gita a very accessible text. Now, there are many. Let me say upfront, I cannot claim that it's any sainthood of any kind. Not at all. On the other hand, the whole idea of language, people want to learn about the Bhagavad Gita, but in most cases it's all on the bookshelves, because again it's presented as complex Sanskrit text. Ideas actually are indeed very deep and beautiful. But the challenge for a writer ought to be, how do you write in a simple way? That's generally a thing the writer should know, how to write in a simple way. So we're working on that project as well, so to make it accessible to the public. Will it work? Time will tell.
Before I let you go, Vasudev, this is one important question that I feel that, we must talk about. And since you brought it up again and again, most of your recent work and books are, they come from the Sanskrit text. And a lot of writers today are doing that, I had to retrain myself in Sanskrit because I realized, and that started with my picking up and reading and जिसे हम कहते हैं भागवत गीता का साधना करने, when I became a sadhak again, that's when I retrained myself in Sanskrit, because even with Gita Press, Bhagavad Gita, Srimad Bhagavad Gita that I was referring to, I realized that in Sanskrit, you have to understand the Sanskrit text in its purest form in order to actually imbibe what it's trying to say. I would like to know about your, expertise or interest in Sanskrit in order for you to pick up such tough projects and turn them into, because you can't simplify till the time you understand
Yeah,
it. To the,
and in fact, I'll take a question further. I can't take the risk of making it a superficial.
Correct.
Yeah, there's a risk also of that, of
Correct.
making it too, it's not that. But here's the thing. With enough diligence, you can really hit every word and find out the meaning. So am I a Sanskrit scholar? Certainly not. But I know what I don't know. And therefore, I would go to any extent to find out its meaning, and I would consult experts. I think to imagine that I could do this on my own is not possible. I would obviously consult people who know about this better than me.
So what you're saying is you have a basic understanding
yeah,
of
yeah,
Sanskrit,
yeah.
and then you also consulted experts to
Have to.
ensure that whatever sense you're making of it is correct.
Legitimate and correct.
Simplify and make others understand. There's a lot of personal understanding that creeps in, and at times that may not be
It
the
could be wrong.
right interpretation.
Could be wrong.
So how do you address that aspect?
Well, first of all, I address it by saying I'm not a scholar. Let's be fair. If I say I'm Swami Vasudevananda and here I am, it's not. I don't have any such pretensions. But that's why I'm saying it is very important to check once, twice, thrice with any people. And again, if the book is about me, then the point itself is lost. I think I've got to try. Now, this was a conflict because, on the one hand, if I don't talk about me and my experiences, that was in fact a challenge I had. I was advised that I should put personal anecdotes to explain certain concepts. I thought it was a double-edged sword. On the one hand, yes, people then say, okay, there's this guy who's going through this. On the other hand, the book shouldn't be about me because it is counter to the whole point of of the book. But I do try as far as possible to not say I have understood. I am the great God here understanding. We should try these things to keep ourselves out as far as possible. We must try. We must make an honest attempt. It may not always work. You're bound to throw in a bit of an ego somewhere. It's going to happen. But we should try not to do that.
Okay. In the last segment, I think, and just to wrap it up, before I ask you to play some more, and maybe I'll also hum.
Okay, sure.
But what I'm saying is that what would be your few tips to people who are watching this podcast to lead a happy, healthy, fulfilling life? To sum it up on.
I'm not a guru, so I think again I'm really feeling this is not a question. This is not a question I'm authorized to answer.
The kind of work that you've done, whether or not you like it, you are a guru.
Please, don't embarrass me. First thing I would say is take up a musical instrument.
Okay.
Buy a musical instrument today and get a teacher, and you'll spend a lot of blissful time learning about how to use it, how it feels, the sounds it makes, and it can actually, it can be a very, very. Of course, they say you de-stress with music. Those are not very nice terms, but it can be a very great source of joy. And then as you examine the tunes, and then as you know, our rags, they tell stories. So then when you listen to our sounds with intent, our rags, then there are stories that come up from them. They're all layered. But anyway, the point, for example, certainly I would say is music can be the first stop on the journey of having a beautiful life, because it really, if you reach a certain stage of proficiency, it gives answers without actually words being said. But in any case, the joy is there of trying to pick up an instrument, making an effort to learn it, and coming out with a few sounds. They make you happy. They've seen the joy in people who are trying to learn the flute or any instrument, that they can actually put two notes together and it makes sense. That seems to erase all the unhappiness of the past, or else the trouble of the past. And those few moments are of great importance, bliss. So that's what I would say. Certainly, that's what I would say. Rest of it is, I don't think I'm qualified to say anything.
So primarily pick a hobby.
Don't call it a hobby.
Okay.
I don't like that word. This is not, ki Saturday ko baith ke just stare at it and pretend. It's not that. It has to become a mania. Okay, if it's not an instrument.
Make an instrument part of your life.
Yes, that works. But don't call it a hobby. You sit there and strum. These things are actually they are bottomless. Music is a bottomless source of infinite joy.
That you have to.
So it's not. And again, if the idea the minute you say I'm doing it because I want to play for somebody else, it's gone. It has to be our own personal thing. I want to do it for myself. If I want to do it for applause and so on, then you are doomed to an unhappy life. Do it for yourself.
Super. So let's all lead a happy life.
Yeah.
Pick up an instrument.
Yeah, do that.
Today. Get yourself a guru. Get trained in it.